Grace Revolution, right. This morning, this is not going to be one of Andrew's spectacular theological expositions all about grace and how everything interweaves together and, you know, right from the Word of God. There is some Word of God, you'll be pleased to know, in it. But this is, I want to really tell you some of my story and my personal grace revolution, I should say. And so, next slide, please. So, start at the very beginning. So you've got to start at the very beginning. Okay, you can fire up the next one. Here we go. Start at the very beginning. There she is. Isn't she adorable? Isn't she just adorable? Don't you just want to squeeze those cheeks? So that's me at about, I don't know, I suppose just a few months old. And so really, the reason why I put up that slide is that, you know, we all start somewhere. We all start as babies. And I wasn't brought up in a Christian, in inverted commas, family. My parents were not regular church attenders. But interestingly, we were, both my brother and I, we were christened in the Methodist church, and that local Methodist church. And my mum always took us to Sunday school. And we went to church on a Sunday morning. And for any of you that, you know, my memories of church on a Sunday morning were sitting there being given gobstoppers, because a gobstopper lasted long enough through a whole sermon. And if you sucked away at that, then you weren't messing about and talking, because they were, for younger ones who don't know what a gobstopper was, it was just like the most enormous boiled sweet you can ever see in your life. So you sucked away at that, and that kept you quiet. And so, you know, but somehow in all of that, I always had a God consciousness. Always had an awareness of God in my life. And he always framed my understanding of the world. He was always in the background. He was always there. I would think about God. I would think about what I was learning in Sunday school. I would absorb that as I was going through. And it was wasn't really about relationship. It was probably more about compliance to a set of rules and circumstances and understanding. It was a knowledge-based understanding of God. So it was, you know, God is this and God is that, and Jesus is this and Jesus is that, and this is what happened in the stable and this is what happened. So it was very much a knowledge-based relationship. It wasn't a relationship based on any kind of true sense of connection. There was stuff in there probably about behavior modification. So you behave in a certain way. You don't do certain things. I mean, this was Northern Ireland in the 70s, so, you know, it was a very conservative society. So, you know, you don't drink, smoke, or chew, or go with boys that do. I mean, that's kind of really what it's all about, isn't it? And that's what for our American friends there. I thought I'd just throw that one in there, you know. And so it was very much that kind of, you do as you're told, and you behave in a certain way, and that keeps you right with God. That kind of squares the circle. Make sure everything's okay. Okay, we can have the next one. So this is really what it's about. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and gave his life for us. So although I didn't really understand what that was when I was growing up as a teenager, that's really where it all begins. That's where it all starts. It's not about us. It is all about him and what Jesus did for us on the cross. The fact that he brought us to a place that we actually could enter into a real relationship that wasn't just based on how we behaved, that wasn't based on what we read, that wasn't based on adhering to a certain set of rules and ticking a set of boxes, that it actually is about love. But I don't think I really understood that. And I guess in all our relationships, we have the way we were raised and the way we were brought up sets our view of the world, sets how we consider things, sets how we behave towards other people. and sets how we think God feels about us. And I was brought up in a very loving family. There's no two ways about it. I had a really great dad who was a great provider. He wasn't, a man given to, he was a bit of a hugger, but he wasn't really a man given to lots of, outward displays of affection. But we knew that our dad loved us and would do anything for us. And he was a very practical dad. He was very skilled in, he was an engineer, but he was one of those sort of men who could turn his hand to anything, and usually did. And the way, the cobbler's children always have holes in their shoes. Well, that was a bit like us, I always remember that we had all the components for a central heating system in our house for about 10 years, but we didn't have central heating. So we had the radiators, we had the pipework, we had the timer, we even had the boiler, but none of them were all put together until one day when my dad didn't have other jobs to do for other people. We got our central heating, which is I'm sure anybody who comes from a family like that knows exactly what that's like. But at the same time, we always knew that he was there for us. And I guess that framed, as it often does, my view of God, my Heavenly Father. He was always there for me. One of the things that, my dad's passed away now, and I can say this, and hope he's not listening, but my dad wasn't very good at being on time. So, always remember the story, which he would get very annoyed if I told the story, but, I remember one time waiting outside of school, and my dad only worked like about a mile away, and he was supposed to pick me up and take me home. And now, again, for the young people, this is before mobile phones, and if you didn't have your 10p for the phone box, and apart from that, there had to be somebody at the other end, mum or dad had to be at home to pick up the phone. And so there was no way of getting in touch. And I remember standing in Hollywood for about an hour and a half waiting for my dad, and he never came. And then, what am I going to do? And then finding somebody's house and ringing and whatever. So, he was a great dad, but he wasn't perfect. And so my view of God, I think my Heavenly Father was, he was a good dad, but, he did have failings. Maybe he wouldn't always be on time. Maybe he would make me wait for things. Maybe if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, I wouldn't get what I needed. And, maybe if he didn't have enough money in the bank, I wouldn't get exactly the Christmas present that I wanted to get. So if my earthly father wasn't always able to buy me everything that I wanted, maybe God, my Heavenly Father, isn't able to do or able to give me everything that I want every time that I want it. And as Andrew talked last week about that, he gives you your needs, not your greeds. And I suppose that kind of framed my sort of view as I was growing up, because what you do is, and I'm sure we all do this, is you base your understanding of God on the comprehension that you can do with your finite mind. So it's almost impossible for us to understand the infinite, because we're not infinite. We're grounded very much in this world. We're grounded in a very finite reality. What we can see, touch, taste, hear, smell. Because that's what, that's all that we have. That's all the senses we have. So that's what we kind of base our understanding, that's how we get our understanding of the world. But what we tend to do is we tend to make our understanding of God that as well, on what we can taste and see and touch and feel and smell. But God's so much bigger than that. And the only way that we can get that understanding is to move into a deeper understanding of God that He gives us, and not one that we work up for ourselves. So I'm growing up in 70s Northern Ireland through the Troubles. Anybody who's of a similar age to me in their 50s will remember what that was like. It was a very tough and difficult time. Church played a very fundamental part in a lot of our lives. When I say church, I don't necessarily mean anything about having a relationship with God. It was kind of about church. It was our social life. It was where our friendship groups were. It was what we could kind of relate to. And I suppose in all of that, I'm getting inklings, I'm getting glimpses of what God is doing and the potential that there is in a relationship with the Lord. And I decided then, as I say, I was a Methodist, I decided that I wanted to do something before I went to university. And, these were really in the days before gap years. And there weren't, in those days, not that many people went to university. Like in 1980, not that many people. I mean, apparently, I saw a statistic recently that in 1981, there was 68,000 people went to university in the whole of the UK, and last year it was 500,000. So that's, so going to university was a really big thing. And, but I thought, no, I don't want to do that straight away. I want to do something for God. So again, it kind of comes back to me. I want to do something for God, as if God needed me to do anything for him, like, because he kind of created the universe, so, like, what else, what I need to do for him, but I really felt I needed to do something for God. So you can throw up the next slide there. So in 1980, I hope you're really impressed that I still have this, because I know I'm really impressed that I still have this. So in 1980, I applied for and was successful and got into something called the Youth Evangelism Team. Okay, you can throw up the next one as well, if you can all see that. There I am. Look at me, with the most enormous Bible. Do you see that? That's like a serious Bible. That's the Bible that a really good Christian has. I hope you understand that, right? So that was the 5 of us there, and as you can see, there's nothing religious about us. Like, of course, all the girls are in skirts, all the boys in shirts and ties. You see, that's what we need to be in here. There's not a tie in this whole room. Is there a tie in there anywhere? No, there's not a tie in the room. Tell you what, you're all going to hell, I tell you. And so there we were, standing outside. That's way, if I remember rightly, I think that's way in the wilds of West Cork. I think you guys were down there. And I think that's maybe like Skimmarine or Lisnagannog or somewhere, anyway, tiny little church. And so that's what I wanted to do. And basically the Youth Evangelism Team was what it says on the tin. We were youth and we evangelized and we worked in a team, because that's kind of what it was. And what we would do, we would go around, we would go around different churches, and those were the days when it was really cool and hip to do like little plays and skits. And so we would do these little skits, and we all, a couple of the guys played guitars, and, we would have coffee bars. That was real, like in 1980, coffee bar was quite a big thing. And it was really like hip and down with the young people, You remember them, Lawrence, don't you? Yes, you do. You were there. And you'd play the guitars, and you'd sing, through it all, I learned to trust in Jesus. And then, yeah, he was in the pub. We would kind of, hold them a wee bit over the fire just a little while, just till their toes began to tingle. And then we would have the appeal, and people would come to the Lord. And you know what? I'm making fun of it, but actually it was a really amazing time. But at the very beginning of that year, in the September, and we'd got together, and we'd had our team building week or whatever. And we went for our first evangelistic trip up to Glengormley Methodist, and I just realized after a couple of evenings that this was really, really hard. And this was a very tough environment, and it was, Glengormley at that time was still a relatively new estate, and there were a lot of people there who'd been through a lot of stuff in the Troubles, and they'd been rehoused up there. It was just had not long been built, and people had left. People had been taken away from where they had lived, and they basically had to run to somewhere else and be rehoused for their own safety. So it was a difficult place. And there were a lot of young people, and they were very challenging, and they were challenging this, very middle-class girl from East Belfast who'd never really had to deal with those type of young people before. I, came from a nice family. I went to a nice middle-class grammar school. I was a good girl, always did her homework, always had it in on time. very compliant, very obedient, going into this place where you met young people who were very confrontational, who didn't accept anything that you said without questioning it. And so it was really tough. And after a couple of nights, I thought, I can't do this. And the youth pastor in the church said to me, Helen, where are you with the Lord? And I took great offence at that. Excuse me. I am exactly where I need to be with the Lord. Thank you very much. Can you not see? I'm a youth evangelist. And we were sitting in this hall, and the emotions were overwhelming. And I realized I know all about God. I know all about Jesus, but I don't actually have a personal relationship with him. So on the 19th of September 1980, I gave my life to the Lord. And yes, I had known all about God, and it had been a journey. But that particular night in Glengormley Methodist Church Hall was a transitional moment in my life. It was the moment that I stepped out of a head knowledge into a heart understanding of a relationship with God. And that really changed everything. Now, I didn't instantly become, a fully mature Christian overnight. But there was no doubt about it that my growth in the Lord was accelerated because of all the good stuff that had gone in before. But nothing was better than having that relationship with God. So we can throw up the next one. So really, this is what it's all about, love. But it's not just about the love for God. Love has driven me to do all sorts of things and make all sorts of decisions, and not all of them the right ones. You can pop up the next one. So here we go. Now we're back. We're in 1987. Princess Diana had an awful lot to answer for. Look at those glasses. Aren't those glasses awesome? I mean, that's like practically my whole face. And but you know what? It looks all right, And there's a big lace thing going on there as well. And so love. During that year, on the youth evangelism team, I had met a guy called David Rigby. And over the next kind of 7 years, we kind of drifted in and out of relationship. And eventually we married in 1987. Now, it looks pretty good there, but the marriage was pretty disastrous from day one, to be honest. It was extremely difficult. We probably had a few months when we were just about doing okay, but very, very quickly the relationship deteriorated. And we separated in 1988 after only 18 months. And I can honestly say that that period of my life was probably the darkest period of my life. I was completely broken. I was broken emotionally. I was broken spiritually, I was broken mentally, and I was broken physically, because it had got to such a place in my life that I was I was even getting to the stage of self-harming. Didn't even really understand what that meant. Nobody certainly talked about it in those days. And I came back to Northern Ireland, and I just thought, that's it. And what was interesting, because I was still very much part of that religious world, and because Northern Ireland was the conservative society that it was, I literally didn't know any other Christian that was separated or had been through divorce. I didn't know anyone else who'd been in that position. And so I came back to Northern Ireland, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And but part of me knew I'd actually been married to a Methodist minister. So I thought, well, I'm not sure I want to go back into Methodism. Although, having said that, I got a lot of support, particularly from a gentleman called Harold Good, who was actually on TV the other night talking a bit about the peace process. An amazing, wonderful Methodist minister who was a huge support to me at that time. But I kind of knew I need something more. Now, I was holding on to my faith. I never, and although I really felt in a dark place, I still knew that God was there, even though I was holding on with my fingertips. But I thought to myself, I need something more. I need to be in a place where I can get the healing that I actually need. And so that's when I actually joined Christian Fellowship Church up in Strandtown. And, I started in that place to be introduced to the things of the Spirit. I knew a little bit about it. I'd kind of dipped in and out, but it just really freaked me out. It was kind of scary, and people were telling me you need to keep away from that kind of thing because it's dangerous, and it's kind of culty, and you don't know what's going on. But in that, something in me, and I know it was the Holy Spirit working in me, something in me said, I need to be in a place where I'm going to be challenged. And, there are times in our lives when we run away from challenge because we really don't want to be challenged because it's hard to be challenged. But something in me said, I need to be challenged. And so over a period of time, you can put up the next verse there. Over a period of time, this is what I was doing. I sought the Lord and He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. And during that period of time, again, 7 years, there's so much significance in 7, isn't there? 7 is the perfect number. And my life has certain periods of my life have gone in 7-year blocks. And so over that period of that next 7 years, I opened myself up to the Lord, and He really ministered healing to me. And that was a period of time when, I found about the things of the Spirit. I learned about the prophetic. The first time I ever sang a prophetic song was in a home group, in a group of people. The first time I ever shared something on my heart that I felt was for somebody else was in that environment. And I got very involved in worship and was very involved in the worship team and all of that in CFC. And one of the things, and I think I really want to share this with folks this morning, was the journey of forgiveness that God brought me through. So I told you about the breakup of my relationship with David. It was, well, acrimonious probably isn't it? It was basically just, it stopped. We had no communication with each other. I didn't know what had happened to him. He didn't know what had happened to me. I went ahead and went through, I divorced him and I did it all over here. He had nothing to do with it. I had no communication. The solicitors did whatever the solicitors do, and that was it. And so there was that sense of working in a bit of a vacuum. But what God did in that 7 years was He brought me on a journey of forgiveness. So without the benefit of being able to talk to the other individual, God said to me, Helen, you need to walk on a journey of forgiveness. So over that period of time, I decided that I was going to forgive him. And forgiveness is not an emotional reaction. Forgiveness is a decision. And it's a decision that you have to make over and over and over and over and over again. As Jesus said in the Word to His disciples, they said, well, how many times should you forgive somebody? 7? And Jesus goes, no, 70 times 7. And actually what He meant by that was infinite. He didn't just mean, 490 times. It's just, you have just got to keep on doing it. And that was a really incredibly, that was a releasing thing for me. And I was living my life. And then in about the January of 1995, I can't remember the exact date, but around about the January of 1995, totally out of the blue, I got a phone call from a guy called Tony Graff. And Tony had been our best man. And Tony said to me, first of all, I was like, why are you phoning me? And secondly, how did you ever get my number? And see that, it's amazing what you can actually do. And this is before the internet, folks, so I don't know how he found my number. I suppose the Methodist Mafia was still kind of about, so he must have got it through there. Anyway, so, once a Methodist, always a Methodist kind of, And so he phoned me, and I said, right, okay. And he said, look, I need to phone you. David doesn't know I'm phoning you, but I feel you need to know this. And I said, right, what's the crack? And he said, he's very ill. I said, right, okay. And he said, look, he's very ill, and I feel that you needed to know that. And I went, right, okay. And he kind of left. He says, look, obviously that's a lot to take on board. I'll ring you tomorrow, and we'll talk a wee bit more. And overnight, now I don't know where this came from, okay, but overnight I thought to myself, has he got AIDS? Now, why I thought that, I have no idea. Absolutely none, apart from the fact that Tony had said to me that he got a brain tumour. And, I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but, in the early days, one of the key ways in which they began to identify this strange new illness was there was these young men getting very, very strange, super rare cancers. But cancers that a doctor would see once in a lifetime, they were seeing them, like 4 times in a fortnight. And that's what kind of sparked a lot of the investigation as to what this strange new phenomenon was. So I don't, maybe there was a bit of subliminal stuff in there, but that kind of came into my head. So I said to Tony the next day, and the way you have those conversations and I actually take 50 minutes to say something and, kind of going, I don't know how to say this and I'm wondering if I should. And, when you're kind of like hedging, but does David have AIDS? And there was a silence on the phone. And that was my answer. And I said, I really want to see him. I really want to see him. And so Tony said, look, I'll go and see him in the hospital and I'll say to him and I'll ask him and I'll come back to you. So a couple of days later, he phoned me back and he said, yeah, I've been to see him, and he says that he will see you. And so the next day I got on a plane with a good friend and we went over to London. And the interesting, the amazing thing, it's not, why should we be surprised, right? God had it all lined up. God had it all lined up. So he had actually been in a very busy London hospital. I think he'd been in Guy's, and it was very busy. And do you know what? We're talking 1987. It was still very, very difficult for people that had AIDS. It was very difficult. They were still treated like pariahs, Nowadays, when we can talk about so many things so freely, it's easy to forget how people were treated. How they were, put in wards away from everybody else, that people had to put gloves on to go and see them. It was a very, very difficult. So he had been in one of the very big, busy London hospitals, but because of the tumour and where it was pressing on his brain, it had caused paralysis. So they had moved him to the London Neurological Hospital to get some kind of radiotherapy to try and reduce the size of the tumour and give him back a bit of mobility. So he was in this small, I'm not sure if it's a private or an NHS hospital. It was kind of like a private hospital. So we had his own room. It was beautifully peaceful. It was a wonderful, caring surrounding. So when I arrived there, he's in a room all on his own, just resting because he was bedbound, just resting. And I went in and it was like those 7 years had never happened. All that. There was no bitterness, there was no anger, there was only grace and peace. And I said to him, it's lovely to see you. And he said, it's lovely to see you too. And I said, look, I just need to tell you, will you forgive me for the things that I did to you? And he said, yes. And will you forgive me for the things that I did to you? And I said, yes. And I said, shall we pray? And so we prayed together. And that was only possible because of that journey that I had taken, that journey of forgiveness. If I had held on to the bitterness and anger and upset, do you really think that God would have provided me with that opportunity? What, to go and see a dying man and give him a hard time? What's that about? That opportunity was available because I'd walked that road of forgiveness with him. Now, it's not about me, it's about God working in me. Because of my flesh, I couldn't have done that. And so I spent literally a couple of hours, and and that was a great deal of freedom for me, because obviously, as you can imagine, like, he didn't get it through a blood transfusion. Okay, he got it because he was in a gay homosexual relationship, and that's how he contracted the disease. But the amazing thing was that that was peripheral. What the key thing was that the pair of us had been set free. And for me as well, that was instantly, because I didn't know any of this, folks. Now, I did not know that this was the reason why our marriage hadn't worked. The day that I found out that he had that diagnosis was the day that I found out that, it wasn't me that was the problem. It was my gender that was the problem. So for me to find that out, there was like a huge burden lifted off me as well, because it was like, wow, that's like, so this was nothing to do with me, really. So, God did an amazing work in that. And so that was the January. He passed away in the March, and he was buried on Easter Tuesday of 1995, So that was just a very, kind of a roller coaster. But the amazing thing was God was in all of that. God's grace, given those opportunities, because I was partnering with him and what he wanted to do. So we can have the next one. So then in the May of that year, June of that year, I met this gentleman here, which is Gary Mills, and I'm sure lots and lots and lots of you will know him. And we got married then in November. So as you can see, 1995 was really quite a busy year. There was an awful lot going on. And in the interim, I'd also been on a 6-week trip to Mexico and Georgia and the States. And so it was kind of, and changed jobs. So 1995 was pretty manic. And then out of that came, so that's the little chicken that I gave birth to. 5 pounds and 5 ounces that child was. Look at the size of him. I mean, you'd get more eating on a Tesco's chicken. Do you know what I mean? And so he was this wee kind of, and that's the big strapping lad that he is now. That was him just back there in June. So, such a blessing. And, we had, for a long time, things went really well. But, sad to say, what would it be, 5.5 years, February 2012, we separated. And I spoke to Gary last night. We have maintained a good relationship. I spoke to him last night and I said, look, I'm going to share a little bit of our story this morning. Are you okay with that? Because it'll be on the interweb. And, and he said, no, that's fine. And thank you for telling me that you were going to do that. But it was different. It was still very difficult. It was still very traumatic. It was still like, how can I be in this situation again? Like, seriously, God? How can this be? I'm a good girl. I've always done the right thing. I've followed the rules. I've behaved myself. I said to Andrew, shall I tell them like my drug and drinking story? I don't have a drug and drinking story. Do you know? I haven't done all the bad things. But yet somehow things have not always gone the way that I've anticipated. But the amazing thing is that God's grace is right the way through it all. And that was when I kind of started, well, before that, I'd been coming to Exchange. And during that period of time, Andrew had started talking. That would be back in, before Gary and I broke up, that would be like 2010 maybe. Andrew had been preaching so much about the love of God. And I remember saying to him after he'd finished that series a few months later, I said, you need to preach that series again. In fact, you need to preach it a couple of times again. And again, it's about this head knowledge, about being brought on a journey of obedience and understanding. But yet, there's more. There's more. And I began to really then begin to understand God's love for me. That it really genuinely had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with how I behaved. It had everything to do with what he had done. And the thing I would say about, you can throw up the next one, the thing I would say about the whole understanding of the love of God is it is not an overnight sensation. You have to soak yourself in that teaching. You have to, because you've got your programming that you have grown up with. You've got your programming comes from your family, comes from the society you live in, comes with the things that have happened to you, and you're programmed and directed in a certain way. And if there's going to be any change in that, it's a flowing thing. A rock does not become smooth overnight. It takes hundreds and thousands of years for that rock to become smooth as the water rubs on it and rubs on it. And it takes another thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of years for it to turn into sand. That erosion, that constant erosion. So it shouldn't be any surprise to us that it takes a long time for us to change our attitude. Yes, we can have those moments, those epiphanies, those moments when it's suddenly, wow, I've been going that way and I'm going to go that way. And yes, we do have those moments. But a lot of the time, it's a process. It's a gradual process. And you've got to keep on soaking. And so this verse was, I knew I had to press into God. And at this point, I just want to give a little tribute to Penny and to Marilyn, her mother-in-law, because during that period of time, they came alongside me, and we used to meet, I think it was every Wednesday afternoon, didn't we? For a period of about 6 months. God had put me in a particular job that I was in, that it was possible for me to get out for a long lunch break for about an hour. And I used to pop down to Penny's, and the three of us would meet, and those guys were just amazing. And it was Marilyn that gave me this verse. And it was God saying to me, you are hard-pressed. You are hard-pressed, but I am bringing you into a spacious place. I am bringing you into a spacious place. So what does that actually mean, pressing into God? It's not about academic studying, although that really helps. Believe you me, you need to get into the Word. But that's not what it's all about. It's not about behaviour modification, although you might need to make some changes in your behaviour. If your behaviour is unhealthy for you, then you maybe do need to make some changes in your behaviour. But ultimately, that's only a surface. It's all about the truth becoming part of you. The truth of the gospel, the truth of the grace, the truth of God's love becoming part of you. And one of the things that I decided to do was I thought, instead of me trying to think of the solution, how about I ask God what the solution is? What's his strategy for me in this time of my life? And the first strategy he gave me was walking. So I said, right, okay. So again, I was in a job that wasn't as certainly anywhere near as pressured as the job that I'm in now. And so it was great. I'd get up early every morning. I would listen to teaching. And I would go for, a good hour every morning, just right throughout the week. And it was like I was just being washed clean of all the old stuff, of all the guilt and the shame and the disappointment and the fear. And through that walking and just spending time with the Lord, that really began to set me free over a period of time. Get myself into right, eat right. That was another thing. Just, get my eating right, make sure I'm, there was a point at which, I suddenly realised I'm eating an awful lot of ready meals because I love to cook. Anybody who knows me knows I love to cook. But it was like, I've got no one to cook for. I've no husband to cook for anymore. Why would I bother cooking? And God said, no, Helen, you need to stop the ready meals and you need to start eating food. Eat your vegetables, eat your, it sounds really kind of a bit pathetic, but it makes a real difference. Garbage in, garbage out. Good stuff in, good stuff out. But that was God gave me that strategy. It wasn't like, oh, right, I need to do this. It was God was just gently saying, this is what you need to do with your life, Helen. This is how you need to live. And basically what I was getting was God's prescription for change in my life. And that, again, is about the love of God and the grace of God working. So, and here I come to the last couple of slides, Grace Revolution, the one before that, Aaron, thanks. Grace Revolution, what is that? When I look back at that 18-year-old with her really big Bible, who wanted to save the world, it was all about what she did, how she behaved, what she said, what she didn't say, and what she didn't do. And it was hard going, because it's very easy to slip up. But I was driven rather than led. I was driving myself rather than being led by the Lord. And there was good stuff went on and good stuff happened, but a lot of it was about me. And, I was quite hard. I was very black and white. I was very judgmental. Because it was driven by a sense of, I've got to do the right thing. And if I don't do the right thing, it's all going to fall apart. Whereas over the years, I have had that grace revolution. I have had that possibility to see God's love working in my life, changing me, molding me, softening me up, being like that water on the stone, taking off the hard edges. And I'm now in my 56th year. Pause for gasp, okay? I always do that, I'm just like, whatever. I'm downhill to 60, right? The big 6-0. I'm over the brow of the hill. And when I look back and I think, oh my goodness, where am I in my life? I'm actually excited about the next phase in my life. Because I know in the next phase in my life, and you can throw up the next one, that God is directing my journeys so that I can experience the plans for my life. That He is revealing the life paths that are pleasing to Him. That He is escorting me along the way, that He's taking me by the hand and He's teaching me. Because He is the God of my increasing salvation. And that I have wrapped my heart into His.